Before the end, Ork Warboss was Proppa. 13 feet of muscle and fury, power claw grinding, and 50,000 boys screaming his name. Around him, his warg stretched across the horizon of the dead world they'd claimed. Thousands upon thousands of orcs, hundreds of looted tanks belching black smoke. He just crushed Warboss Grotsplat in single combat. Easy, clean. One strike with his power claw and the challenger went down hard. Grotsplat had been big, but against Dregmore at his peak, he might as well have been a grot. The fight hadn't lasted 10 seconds. The boys roared their approval. Dregmore, Dregmore, Dregmore. The sound shook the ground, made the scrap metal towers rattle. Thousands of voices all screaming his name. Better than the finest fungus beer. Better than the roar of a good fight. This was what it meant to be der boss. Dregmore threw back his head and bellowed, not words, just pure triumph. His boys answered with a roar that split the sky. Somewhere in the camp, a mech fired a cannon in celebration. Fights broke out everywhere as orcs, energized by the display, tested themselves against each other. Perfect. This was how it should be. He stomped toward his throne, a wrecked baneblade mounted on a platform of scrap and bones. His banner flew above it. Oi, boss! His head mech, Cog Smack, came scurrying over, goggles glinting in the firelight. Dat was a right proper scrap. Your claw worked beautiful, it did. Course it did, Dregmore rumbled. You're the best mech into warg, ain't you? Well, I wouldn't say. Actually, here I am, Cog Smack grinned, showing a mouth full of metal teeth. Want me to tune it up? Maybe add more sparks? More sparks is always better. Dregmore flexed the power claw, energy crackling. Now it's perfect as is. Go make sure the trucks are ready. We movin' out tomorrow. Where we goin', boss? Wherever the fightin' is. Dregmore settled onto his throne, the metal groaning under his weight. Always forward, always bigger fights. That's how you stay on top. And for 3 glorious years, that philosophy had worked. He'd led his warg from world to world, victory to victory. He defeated 6 rival warbosses, crushed 2 Imperial Guard armies, and looted enough Dakar to arm his boys 3 times over. The warg had grown from 5,000 to 50,000, and Dregmore had grown with it. But that was 3 years ago, before everything changed, before he stopped. Now, 3 years later, Dregmore sat on the same throne, in the same armor with the same power claw, the same height, the same weight, the same everything. And that was the problem. The fight with Bonegnaw should have been quick. Bonegnaw was big, yeah, maybe 10.5 feet of solid muscle, covered in scars and iron plates hammered into his flesh. He'd defeated 23 orcs in the past month alone, including 2 knobs who'd thought they were tough. He stomped into the circle with his massive chopper held high, yelling challenges at the sky. Dregmore met him in the center of the fighting pit, and for just a moment, just a heartbeat, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, but awareness. The awareness that this wouldn't be as easy as it used to be. Bonegnaw charged first, bold git, and swung his chopper in a wide arc that should have been easy to dodge. Dregmore stepped aside, feeling his body respond exactly as it always had. Fast, efficient. His power claw came up, servos whining, crunch, and Bonegnaw's arm came off cleanly. Energy crackled through the air, and the smell of burned meat filled the pit. The crowd cheered. Good start. Clean, but Bonegnaw didn't go down. He didn't even stumble. The pain just made him angry. He swung back with his chopper, one-handed now, and the blade came fast, faster than Dregmore expected. His block was a fraction of a second too slow. The blade bit into his shoulder, deep enough to grate against bone. Pain exploded through him, not the good pain of a solid scrap, but the wrong kind. The kind that said you'd made a mistake. Dregmore roared, not in agony but in frustration. 3 years back that blade wouldn't have touched him. 3 years back he would have taken Bonegnaw down before the git could blink. No, focus, win first, think later. He grabbed Bonegnaw by the throat with his real hand, lifted him. The weight felt wrong, too heavy, or maybe Dregmore's arms just weren't what they used to be, and slammed him into the ground. The impact seemed to crack the earth. Bonegnaw's skull split. He went still. Victory. But around him his boys were quiet. Usually after a good fight they'd be roaring, stomping, celebrating proper. Instead they were looking at each other. whispering, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. One git in the back, young, probably hadn't even been in 10 proper scraps yet, barely 6 feet tall, muttered to his mate. "Took him a while, didn't it?" Another, not quite quiet enough. "Yeah, boss used to be faster." Dregmore's head snapped toward them, his eyes, small, red, burning, locked onto them. "What you looking at, you gits?" They scattered like grots. The crowd dispersed, suddenly very interested in being anywhere else. Within seconds, the fighting pit was empty except for Bone Gnaw's corpse and Dregmore, standing alone, breathing heavy, shoulder bleeding. But the damage was done. They'd noticed. They'd seen him struggle. And worst of all, they'd talked about it. Out loud, where other orcs could hear. That was how it started. That was how a warboss began to fall. Dregmore stomped back to his throne, each step heavier than it should have been. His armor creaked in a way it didn't used to. His shoulder throbbed where the chopper had bit. It would heal. Orcs always healed. He sat heavily and stared at his hands. Still massive. Still scarred from 1,000 fights. Still dangerous enough to crush a skull with ease. But the same size they were 3 years back. The realization settled over him like a weight. He'd reached his plateau. Dregmore was still in control, but the cracks were showing. Weeks later, a young knob named Blood Git challenged him to an arm wrestling contest. Not a proper challenge for leadership, just a friendly bit of showing off. Happened all the time in the camp. Orcs loved testing their strength against each other, seeing who could bench press a truck, who could throw a grot the furthest, who could headbutt a wall the hardest. Good fun. Normal. Dregmore accepted because refusing would have looked weak. They sat across from each other on a makeshift table, a sheet of armor plate balanced on ammunition crates. The boys gathered round to watch, eager for entertainment. Someone started taking bets. They gripped hands. Bloodgit's hand was big, bigger than Dregmore remembered from 6 months prior. Growing fast, this one, dangerous. "You ready, boss?" "Born ready, you git." Someone shouted go, and they pushed. Dregmore won, course he won. He was still the biggest, still the strongest. His arm drove Bloodgit's down to the table in about 15 seconds, but it took effort. Real effort. His muscles strained. His shoulder, the same one Bone Gnaw had cut, ached with the pressure. And worst of all, for just a moment, maybe 5 seconds in, he'd felt Bloodgit pushing back, actually matching his strength, actually making him work for it. This contest should have been a joke. Dregmore won, but it left him breathing hard. The boys noticed. They always noticed. As they dispersed, Dregmore caught fragments of conversation. "Getting close, ain't he? Another year, maybe 2. Still the boss, but for how long?" Dregmore said nothing. He sat at his throne, flexing his hands, feeling the ache in his muscles. Around him, his warg continued its daily chaos. Orcs fighting, mechs building, grots scurrying about with supplies. Everything looked normal but felt wrong. That night he couldn't sleep. Not that orcs needed much sleep, but usually he could manage a few hours of restless unconsciousness. Instead, he lay in his quarters and stared at the ceiling. Every fight he won, but every fight he struggled more. Meanwhile, the young orcs kept growing. Bloodgit, and a dozen others like him, getting bigger and stronger and hungrier with each passing month. But not him, not anymore. In a year, Bloodgit would be his size. In 2 years, bigger. And when that happened, when he was larger than the warboss, every orc in the warg would know what it meant. Time for a new boss. Dregmore clenched his fist until his knuckles cracked. "Ain't gonna go out like a grot," he muttered to himself. "Ain't gonna fade away while some young git takes me throne." He could keep doing what he was doing, winning fights, maintaining control, hoping something changed. But that was just delaying the inevitable. Sooner or later, someone would get big enough to challenge him properly, and he'd lose. Or he could choose how it ended. Choose the fight. Choose the enemy. Go out on his own terms, facing something worth dying for, instead of being dragged down by some git who got lucky. The thought settled into his mind like a key turning in a lock. Yeah, that felt right. That felt orky. If he was gonna go, he'd go proper. He'd find the biggest, baddest fight he could and throw himself at it. Make them remember. Make his death mean something, better than fading away. Better than losing to some nobody. Better than watching himself get weaker while everyone else got stronger. He'd go out the way an orc should, with his boots on and his claw in the enemy's face. Dregmore knew his time was running short. The challenges were coming more frequently now. Not direct challenges for leadership. None of the young orcs were quite big enough or brave enough for that yet, but tests, provocations. Little moments designed to measure him, to see if the boss still had it. He won every time. He had to. Losing even once would trigger a cascade. Every ambitious knob would smell weakness, and they'd come at him like a feeding frenzy. But winning was getting harder. During a raid on an Imperial supply depot, a young orc named Urgrot had charged ahead of the main force, trying to claim the best loot before anyone else. Bold, stupid, exactly the kind of thing that needed to be punished, or the whole warg would fall apart. Dregmore caught up to him inside the depot, between rows of ammunition crates and supply pallets. Oi! Urgrot, the young orc turned. He was big and growing every day. His eyes showed no fear, just calculation, like he was sizing Dregmore up, like he was thinking, how much longer? What, boss? Was just getting some good scrap. You don't run ahead, Dregmore's bellow echoed through the depot. You wait for the order, you fight wit the warg, not for yourself. Yeah, boss, won't happen again. But his tone was dismissive, careless, like he didn't really believe Dregmore would do anything about it. That was the problem. That was why this needed to be dealt with. Dregmore's power claw shot out and grabbed Urgrot by the throat, lifted him off the ground. The young orc struggled, kicked, his face turning darker green as the grip tightened. "You're thinking you're big enough to challenge me," Dregmore growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're thinking you're ready to take me spot," Urgrot managed to choke out. "No, boss." Dregmore slammed him into the ground, hard enough to crack the concrete. Urgrot gasped, wheezed, but didn't pass out. "Tough git. Next time you pull that stunt, I'll rip your head off. Understand?" "Yeah, boss, understand." Dregmore released him and stepped back. Urgrot scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing between the crates. The raid was successful. They looted hundreds of crates of ammunition and a Lehman Russ that was only mostly destroyed. Good haul. The boys were happy. But as they loaded the loot onto their trucks, Dregmore caught sight of Urgrot talking to Blood Git. The two young orcs, both growing fast, both ambitious. They noticed him watching and immediately looked away, but not before Dregmore saw the look in their eyes. Soon. They were thinking soon. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. But soon, one of them would be big enough to challenge properly. Dregmore turned away and climbed onto his personal truck, a massive vehicle cobbled together from 3 different Imperial transports, painted red. His mech Cogsmack was already aboard, tinkering with something that sparked and hissed. "Oi, Cogsmack." "Yeah, boss." "How long till we're at full strength, full ready for a big fight?" Cogsmack looked up from his work, goggles magnifying his eyes to comical proportions. "Full strength. We're at full strength now, boss. Got 50,000 boys, more trucks than I can count, and enough Dakar to level a hive city." "Why? You got something in mind?" Dregmore stared out at the horizon, where the sun was setting over the ravaged Imperial world they'd been raiding. "Maybe been thinking. Thinking, that's new. Oi, I can think when I wanna." "Sure, boss, sure," Cogsmack grinned. "So what you thinking about?" "About going out proper," Dregmore said quietly. "About finding a fight worth dying for." Cogsmack's grin faded. For a moment he was silent, just looking at Dregmore with something that might have been understanding. Mechs were weird like that, spent so much time fixing things that they noticed when something couldn't be fixed. "Boss," Cogsmack said carefully, "you know I can upgrade your armor, make you faster, tougher, add more Dakar. Whatever you need. Ain't about der armor, Cogsmack. Armor's fine, it's..." Dregmore flexed his hand. "It's me. Every git into warg is getting bigger." "Yeah, I noticed, but boss, you're still the biggest, still the strongest. You're still, for now, but not forever." Dregmore met the mech's eyes. "You know how this works. Eventually, someone gets bigger than the boss and then," he made a throat-cutting gesture. "So what? You're just gonna give up? Find some glorious last stand and throw it all away?" "Ain't throwing it away. It's called choosing when and where and how. Going out on my terms, not some author gits." Cog Smack was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I get it. That's actually pretty orky, boss. Course it is. I'm the best at being orky. Dregmore allowed himself a grim smile. But not yet. Not until we find the right fight. Something big. Something worthy. Something de boys'll talk about forever. Den let's find it, boss. Let's find you something legendary. The truck roared to life, belching black smoke. As it drove back toward the main camp, Dregmore stared out at the wasteland and thought about death. About legacy. About what it meant to be remembered. He'd won hundreds of battles, killed thousands of enemies, built a warg that would be talked about for generations. But none of that would matter if he died poorly. If he let himself fade, let some upstart take him down in a minor scuffle, let his end be ordinary. No, his death needed to be extraordinary, as big as his life, as orky as everything he'd ever done. He just needed to find the right fight. 6 months before the end, Dregmore found it. The warg had moved into a new system, drawn by reports of ongoing conflict. Where there was fighting, there were orcs, attracted to war like sharks to blood. They'd hit 3 worlds already, looting and raiding, growing the warg with each victory. Then his scouts brought news. Boss, the scout, a smaller orc with a crude telescope strapped to his head, came running into camp. Boss, I found something big. Dregmore looked up from the map he'd been studying, not that he could read maps particularly well, but it made him look strategic. What kind of big? The bad kind, boss. Real bad. There is a fortress, big as a mountain, covered in spikes and bones and gross stuff. Der air around it's all green and nasty. Chaos, Cog Smack muttered, looking up from the weapon he was repairing. Sounds like Nurgle's spiky boys. What's Nurgle? The scout asked. One of the chaos gods, the diseased one, makes you rot from der inside. Real nasty stuff. Cog Smack spat into the dirt. We should stay away from dat place, boss. But Dregmore wasn't listening. His mind was racing, pieces falling into place. How big is dis fortress? Huge, boss. Gotta be 10,000 gits inside, maybe more. And I saw something big, real big, inside the walls. A demon, Cog Smack said quietly. Big as a squigoth, tough as a gargant, and unkillable by normal means. Dregmore felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, never fear, but recognition. This was it. This was the fight. 10,000 spiky boys. A fortress that radiated corruption. A greater demon that even the Humis feared. The kind of fight that nobody would expect an orc to win. The kind of fight that would be sung about forever. We attacking it, Dregmore said. The entire command tent went silent. Every knob, every mech, every boss in attendance turned to stare at him. Boss, Cogsmack said carefully, I just said. I heard what you said. Demons, disease, corruption, all dat. Don't care. Dregmore stood, his full height suddenly dominating the tent. This is the fight. This is where we make our stand. But boss, it's suicide. So what? His bellow shook the tent poles. We don't run from fights, we run toward 'em, especially the big ones, especially the impossible ones. He looked around at his knobs, seeing confusion, fear, and in a few eyes, understanding. I've led you for years, Dregmore continued, his voice lower now, more intense. We've fought across a dozen worlds, we've won every battle, we've built the biggest warg in the sector, and now it's time for one last fight. One fight that'll make everything we've done mean something. We'll all die, boss, Bloodgit said quietly. Yeah, probably, but we'll die fighting. We'll die taking down a demon dat the Humis can't kill. We'll die in a way dat every orc in the galaxy will talk about. And dat, Dregmore grinned, showing all his tusks. That's better than any other death I can think of. The tent was silent for a long moment. Then slowly Cogsmack started to grin, then another knob, then another. When do we attack, boss? Someone asked. Tomorrow. We hit 'em with everything we got. Every truck, every stomper, every last orc. We crash through their walls, we fight through their fortress, and we find the demon. And then, his power claw crackled with energy. Then I'm gonna rip its head off. The knobs roared their approval, thumping their fists against their chests. The sound echoed through the camp, spreading like wildfire. Within minutes, the entire warg knew. Tomorrow they were attacking the Chaos Fortress. Tomorrow they were going to die, and every single orc was excited about it. That night, Dregmore stood alone on a hill overlooking his boys. Over 50,000 orcs preparing for battle in their own unique ways. Some were painting their vehicles, some were sharpening their choppers, some were just fighting each other for fun, warming up. He thought about his life, about the battles he'd won, the victories he'd claimed, the enemies he'd crushed. A good life, a proper orky life, and tomorrow a proper orky death. Gork and Mork, he muttered, invoking the orc gods for the first time in a long time. If you're listening, make it a good fight, make it worthy, and when I fall, make sure the boys remember. The twin gods of the orcs, one cunningly brutal, one brutally cunning, didn't answer. They never did, not directly, but Dregmore felt something anyway, a presence, a weight. Like the universe itself was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. He grinned into the darkness. Tomorrow would be legendary. The end came at dawn in a fortress that should never have been built. The structure rose from the blighted earth like a tumor, all twisted metal and bone, wrapped in greenish mist that reeked of decay. Spikes jutted from every surface, each one topped with a skull that wept pestilent tears. Reality warped around it, bending and twisting. Dregmore stared at it from his position atop his command truck. He let out a warg, his voice carrying. The orcs were spread across the battlefield in a tide of green flesh and rusted metal. Hundreds of trucks and battle wagons, dozens of stompers, 3 gargants that stood like mobile towers, their weapons primed and ready. Somewhere inside that mess is a demon who thinks it's tough. The orcs roared their approval, a sound that shook the earth. We're gonna crash through those walls. We're gonna fight. We're gonna kill everything that moves. The roar intensified, becoming almost deafening. The warg energy built like pressure in a boiler, making the air itself vibrate. For the warg, for Gork and Mork, for the best scrap any of us will ever have. The response was thunderous, and they charged. The first orcs to hit the walls were the ones driving the ram-equipped trucks. Vehicles loaded with scrap metal, engines screaming, drivers laughing maniacally as they smashed into the corrupted barriers at full speed. The walls burst, spraying diseased flesh and pus, and the orcs poured through the gaps like a green tide. Dregmore's truck was in the second wave. As they crossed the threshold into the fortress grounds, the air became thick, hard to breathe, and everything smelled like rotting meat and stagnant water. His skin itched where it was exposed, and he could see boils forming on some of the nearby orcs' flesh. Nurgle's corruption, already at work. Chaos cultists poured from the fortress proper, humans twisted by Nurgle's gifts, their bodies bloated and diseased, covered in sores that wept greenish pus. They carried rusted weapons and wore rotted armor, and they screamed praises to their god as they charged. The battle met in a crash of metal and flesh. Dregmore leaped from his truck, power claw already active, and slammed into the nearest group of cultists. His claw swept through 3 of them in one motion, their bodies bursting. Blood and pus sprayed everywhere. More cultists came at him, swinging axes and cleavers, and he met them with pure fury. Around him, his boys was doing what it did best, fighting. Orcs swung choppers and fired shooters, laughing as they killed and died. The stompers stomped forward, crushing enemies beneath massive feet and firing their weapons into the fortress walls. The gargants unleashed their belly guns, carving huge gouges in the corrupted structure. But the fortress was fighting back. From murder holes and hidden positions, chaos forces fired plague weapons. Guns that shot diseased rounds, cannons that launched barrels of toxic sludge. Dregmore saw orcs falling, not from their wounds but from the disease. Saw them clutch their throats as plague boils burst in their lungs. Saw them collapse as their flesh rotted from their bones. Forward, he bellowed again. Into the fortress, find the big ugly one, kill everything. They pushed forward, losing orcs with every step. 100 died at the outer wall, 200 in the courtyard, 500 in the corridors beyond. But they kept going, because they were orcs, because stopping wasn't in their nature, because their boss had told them to fight, and so they fought. Dregmore led from the front, his power claw carving through everything in his path. Cultists, lesser demons, plague bearers. He killed them all, his claw crackling with energy, his fury an unstoppable force. His armor was pitted now, corroded by the atmosphere. His skin was covered in boils that burst and reformed. Every breath hurt. Every movement was harder than the last. But he kept going. They pushed deeper into the fortress, fighting. Nurgle's realm bled through here, corrupting reality itself. Thousands of orcs were dead now. Maybe 10,000. Maybe more. The survivors were the toughest, the meanest, the ones too stubborn to die to mere disease and corruption. And at their head, Ork Warboss pushed forward, following his instincts, following the pull he felt toward the center of the fortress, toward the heart of the corruption, toward the demon. They found it in a massive chamber at the fortress's core, a space so vast its walls disappeared into diseased mist. The floor was covered in something wet. The ceiling wept pus that fell like rain. And in the center, waiting for them, was the source of all the corruption. The great unclean one. It was massive, 20 feet tall, maybe more, its bulk filling the chamber like an obscene monument. Its skin was the color of old bruises, covered in sores. Its belly was distended, hanging low, pulsing with internal movement. 7 eyes, some open, some half-closed, dotted its face above a mouth full of broken teeth. Flies the size of a man's head buzzed around it in a constant swarm, and it was laughing. Little greenskins, it burbled, its voice like sewage flowing through broken pipes. Come to grandfather's embrace. Come to receive his gifts. Dregmore felt the remaining orcs, maybe 5,000 now, maybe less, hesitate behind him. He stepped forward anyway. Oi, ugly, I'm Ork Warboss, warboss of the biggest warg in the sector, and I'm gonna crump ya. The demon's laughter intensified, shaking the chamber. Such spirit, such vitality. Grandfather will enjoy adding you to his garden, little orc. You'll make a fine plague bearer, yes, yes. I ain't joining nobody's garden, Dregmore roared. Boys, kill it, the orcs charged. The demon swept one massive arm and orcs flew, tossed like toys, their bodies breaking against the walls. It belched, and a cloud of plague gas burst forth, melting everything it touched. More orcs fell, their flesh sloughing off their bones, but they kept coming, because orcs don't know when to quit. Dregmore reached the demon first, his power claw crackling with maximum energy. He swung at the demon's leg, crunch, and his claw bit deep, tearing through diseased flesh. The demon bellowed in surprise and pain, green ichor spraying from the wound. Ha, you can bleed, Dregmore laughed. Means you can die. The demon kicked, and Dregmore went flying, crashing into a wall hard enough to crack stone. His armor caved in, ribs broke, he tasted blood, but he got up. Around him, his orcs were dying by the hundreds. The demon was crushing them, melting them, tearing them apart. But every orc that fell took a piece of the demon with them, a chunk of flesh, a spray of ichor, a moment of pain, death by 1,000 chops. The orc way. Dregmore charged again, ignoring the pain, ignoring the disease spreading through his body, ignoring everything except the need to kill this thing. His power claw found the demon's leg again, cutting deeper. Then its belly, opening a wound that spilled more ichor. The demon grabbed him and squeezed. Dregmore felt his armor crumple, felt his bones crack, felt disease flooding into him through every pore. Nurgle's rot, the plague that killed everything, working its way through his system at impossible speed. But orcs were tough. Tougher than humans, tougher than most species. And Dregmore was the toughest of them all. He raised his power claw, aimed at the demon's face, and swung with all the strength he had, popping through one of the massive grotesque eyes and reaching into its nerve cluster, ripping and tearing. The demon shrieked, a sound that shattered what remained of the fortress's windows, that made the walls crack, that registered in the warp itself. It dropped Dregmore and staggered backward, clutching its face. Ichor poured from the wound, not green now but black. Again, Dregmore bellowed to the surviving orcs. All together, now! They hit the demon from every direction, choppers and shooters and sheer desperate fury. Hundreds of orcs, all striking as one, all united in the single goal of killing this thing. The demon fell to one knee. Dregmore grabbed a large fallen chopper, his power claw damaged, sparking and useless, and charged one last time. He leaped, higher than he'd ever jumped before, higher than should have been possible, carried by pure warg and desperation. And he brought the chopper down right through the demon's skull, splitting it from crown to throat. The great unclean one shuddered, convulsed, let out one final burbling laugh. Then it collapsed, its body dissolving into ichor and plague stuff, melting back into the warp from whence it came. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Dregmore stood atop the demon's dissolving corpse, chopper still in hand, his body breaking down. He could feel Nurgle's rot eating through him, could feel his organs failing, could feel death approaching fast. But he was grinning. "We did it," he managed to rasp. "We killed a demon." He fell to his knees. The chopper clattered from his grip. The surviving orcs, maybe 1,000, maybe less, gathered around him. He saw Cog smack, half his face melted by plague gas. He saw blood git, one arm gone, bleeding heavy. He saw orcs he'd fought beside for years, all dying, all infected. "Boss!" Cog Smack's voice was barely a whisper. "We gotta get you out." "No," Dregmore said. His voice was surprisingly steady. "This is it. This is the end. But we did good. We killed something. That shouldn't be killed. We showed 'em. Showed everyone. That orcs don't. Don't quit." His vision was fading now. "Tell 'em," he managed. "Tell 'em I went out, the proper way." "We will, boss," Bloodgit said, eyes beaming with pride on his scarred face. "We'll tell everyone. You'll be remembered. Forever." Dregmore's grin widened. "Good. That's good. That's all. All that matters." Dregmore Clawboss was gone, but his death echoed. The fortress, its demon destroyed, began to collapse. The corruption that held it together was fading, reality reasserting itself. The walls cracked. The floors buckled. The ceiling crumbled. The surviving orcs fled, racing through corridors that were disintegrating around them, past rooms that were folding in on themselves. They burst out of the fortress just as it imploded, collapsing into a mountain of rubble and dust. Out of all the orcs who'd entered, less than 1,000 escaped. They stumbled away from the ruins, their bodies ravaged by disease and injury, most of them dying even as they fled. But they carried the story with them. The story of Dregmore Clawboss, who'd led a warg against impossible odds, who'd fought a greater demon of Nurgle and won, who'd chosen his death and made it count. That story spread wide. From warband to warband, world to world, warg to warg, details changed with each telling. Sometimes Dregmore was 15 feet tall, sometimes 20. Sometimes he fought 3 demons, sometimes 10. Sometimes the fortress had 1,000,000 defenders, but the core remained. A warboss who'd chosen to go out fighting rather than fade into obscurity, who'd gone out the way an orc should, with his boots on, his enemies defeated, and their greatest champion fallen before him. The proper way.